Thanks for joining us tonight for a Grace Live conversation. We're really happy to have you here tonight. We have a special guest with us, Lisa Welter. She'll introduce herself in a little bit. As many of you know, Grace exists really to raise awareness within the faith community and equip Christian churches and ministries to better recognize, prevent, and respond to abuse. A lot of times our focus is child abuse. We also look at other forms of spiritual abuse and abuse of power. We really want to help the church create the safe environment that God intends for us to have. So with that in mind, that's who Grace is. Lisa, can you tell us, who are you?
Well, thanks for having me first, Pete. We've been friends for a number of years, so it's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Lisa Welter, and I'm the founder of the Catalasso Group, and I lead a holistic alternative dispute resolution center. I'm a pastor by vocation, have done my training at Bethel Seminary for transformational leadership, and starting a doctorate in a couple of weeks. So pray for me. I've heard they're a little challenging, but I think I might be up for the task.
Awesome. My wife actually just finished hers. So
yeah. That gives me encouragement.
There we go. So as we head into our discussion today, we're really going to be focusing on how does abuse impact relationships. As we have that discussion, we are going to be talking in part about how having experienced abuse impacts your relationships with other people, because it does have the potential to have a pretty big impact on how you relate with a lot of different people. We are also going to talk at times about how abuse may impact the relationship between the abuser and the victim. Often, even after the abuse occurs, there is some form of relationship that exists after that, whether it might be a parent and there's still an ongoing relationship, whether it might be a person that you know, and even though the relationship has changed, it still exists there. So we're going to talk about some of those dynamics. As we do, I want to make sure that we head into that conversation with an understanding. The first and most important thing is that if someone ever were to talk to you, if you have been a victim of abuse, and would ever start putting pressure on you to restore the relationship, it is super important to know that they are not entitled to a restored relationship. You may choose to go that direction if it is safe, and only if it is safe. But that person is not entitled to that. Often, whether it's somebody that's well-meaning, whether it's a faith leader that might be involved in the situation, whether it's the person themselves, there might be really a lot of pressure to restore a relationship that really should not be, because of the risk of harm, because of an extreme power imbalance that really leaves a person that's already been hurt very vulnerable. So please know that at times, if we get into a conversation about restoration of a relationship or how to maintain boundaries within a relationship, that under no circumstances should that ever be taken as saying you need to. It's a recognition that sometimes it is possible. Sometimes the person who received the abuse chooses to go in that direction. But that is something that is and needs to be within the power of the person who survived the abuse. That is not another way for the abuser to hold power. So please know, we want to tread very carefully on that territory. Please know that under no circumstances should anything we say tonight be taken as another voice pressuring you to restore a potentially harmful dangerous relationship. So I just want to make sure we have that foundation in place. As we have that foundation in place and we get into this discussion, Lisa, I think it would be really helpful for all of us to share as much as you feel comfortable with of your own story, kind of the background that brought you here into this discussion today.
Yeah, I would love to. Pete, first, I just want to say, as an overcomer of abuse, I try to label myself as an overcomer, not a victim anymore,
Yeah.
because there's a season for that, right? And so I don't want to diminish that, but I also speak from a place of overcoming. If someone had said that to me in the days when I was struggling through and kind of untangling myself from blurred boundaries and really difficult conversations and litigation, I think that would have been helpful for me. So thank you for saying that, um, as one who has walked that long journey. Friends, I have gone through a lot of various types of abuse. I have 150 hearings from the family courts now in my track record. I don't say that as a token by any means, but it's been the impact of what abuse has looked like in my life and the struggle in the family court system with a divorce and domestic violence perpetrated on myself, my children, and the abuse that they endured, which led to long term custody litigation and reunification processes, to my own parents suing me in court. And so I've walked the journey of walking through and experiencing abuse, and then kind of engaging with the local church, carrying a scarlet letter for a very long period of time. Then moving into ministry, just felt a call into ministry and completed seminary, and kind of shook off the scarlet letter, but there was nowhere to put it except for underneath a rug. And as I entered into full time ministry, I started meeting with families who were struggling through similar dynamics. And I didn't have the tools. Even though I had had the experience, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to help them. I didn't necessarily have tools and resources to give people other than, well, go find a Christian therapist. Here's a Christian lawyer. But they started the litigation process as well, which was very painful and challenging. So for me in my own journey, I found that the process of litigation actually exacerbated the trauma. It made it worse because it was such an isolating experience. But again, having been a pastor for a number of years and having no tools and resources at my fingertips to help those, even though I saw myself in their shoes, was pretty challenging for me. And so over the years, I have spent time leading in the child welfare system at a state level and then at a national level. And I've seen this pervasiveness of those that have struggled through abuse. They've overcome it, but they don't necessarily have this safe frameworks to kind of unpack that and heal in a safe community. Rather, it's done in independent counseling, which is good. But if I've learned a process called circles, which has been just exponentially helpful for me as I've healed, as I processed my journey. For those that have been abused, I mean, I've found myself frequently saying, like, I don't think I can trust myself anymore. The decisions that I've made, how did I get here? Um, how did this happen to me? And having spent time in circle and listening to other people's stories of hard things has helped me work through those dynamics and regain my sense of boundaries and where I was being called in life. So I've opened up a holistic alternative dispute resolution center today because I just believe there's a space in America for us as Christians, and for those that have been victimized and who have overcome, to change the narrative for the way we lead our families, for the way the church involves itself in that process, because we can be a healing community. But then also by equipping those that have overcome it with tools and resources so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. I love as you described that, the incredible role that relationship played even in your healing journey. So that pain came to you through relationship,
Yeah.
but healing came to you through relationship as well.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about relationships prior to our coming on for this event today, I found it really interesting. You talked about 4 key relationships in a person's life. And I'm wondering if you could maybe share some of those thoughts that you had about those 4 key relationships in a person's life, because I think that they really help us to understand relationship in a more complete way.
Yeah. So I didn't come up with this on my own. I actually did a bunch of research, and the Chalmers Center down in Chattanooga, Tennessee, talks about this a lot. There was a man back in the 18th century. His name was Thomas Chalmers, and he was a theologian in his day, but he was also a moral philosopher. And he was working primarily with the most vulnerable populations in his community. And he spoke of 4 key relationships that all human beings need to bring into balance to have kind of a whole sense of living. There's a relationship with God. Do you deny God? Do you believe He exists? But putting that back into right relationship is important, because we're hardwired for a relationship with Him. There's a relationship with yourself or your sense of being. Do you have a positive self-image, or do you have a negative self-image? In many cases, when we have overcome abuse, that is a very, very critical area of life that we have to reconcile and put into right balance. In many cases, we absorb a lie that we're unworthy, or that we don't deserve respect, or I'm no good. And we have to turn that over and look at it from a different way, so that we can engage the rest of our life, our sense of purpose in that. There's a relationship with your family or your community, or those that you ascribe that's your tribe. If you don't have a sense of community in your life, it's really a hard journey to be in isolation and walk alone. And so a sense of community is a big deal too. It's challenging though, if you have walked through the season of abuse and that person is in your family. What do you do with that? Where do you put that? You can't put it in a closet. It has to go somewhere. You have to work through that and come to some resolve and place it in a state of balance that you, as the one who has been hurt, can live with, right? That doesn't necessarily mean I felt like I had to keep opening the door, make it better, make it better. Maybe I can fix it this time. No, no, no. That's not necessarily what that means. What it means is we can be validated, we can be heard, and we can make peace with what has happened to us, but we don't have to keep saying yes to entering into that relationship. We can rebuild our community, but we have to find community. And then the 4th relationship is a relationship with our sense of purpose. What have we been uniquely called to bring to the world? And we can bring our fullest self when we have leaned in on all of those other key relationships to go and live and fulfill our purpose. So those are the 4 key relationships. That's really what we've anchored the ministry of the Catalasso group on, that if we can be of value to help people find balance in those 4 key relationships in the midst of conflict, in the midst of hard days, they are going to overcome their circumstances and live a much more peaceful, restful life.
Wow, I love that, and just how interconnected
Mhm.
all of those are, and how your relationship with yourself, your relationship with God, your relationship with family, and your very purpose, how they all connect, how they drive each other. And abuse has this ability to disrupt that,
Mhm.
and then it can have an ongoing impact. And so I love the work that you're doing to help a person find ways to maybe bring some balance back into those relationships, um, which can be so, so powerful. There are times when a person is trying to find balance within a relationship and they're kind of navigating their way, and then they start getting all these other messages. And I think
Mhm.
you talked about it when you talked about uh, this sense that somehow you had to open the door, somehow you had to fix the relationship. And sometimes what ends up happening is that the needs of others, whether it's the needs of the person that maybe did some of the abuse, or the needs of another family member, or the needs of a faith leader, or whoever it might be, come in. What happens if that person's needs are not the same as your needs? What do you do then?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good question. That's kind of a loaded question, Pete. I feel, I can answer it in my own story, if that's helpful, because I feel like it's so unique to each circumstance. For me, I was raised in a household and my boundaries didn't matter. My father had the last word. We were raised in an alcoholic atmosphere. And so, typically when you are raised in that environment, you don't know how to advocate for your needs because you're always managing whatever else is going on in the household. And so, being raised in an environment like that, I don't fault my parents for that, but I see a dynamic in those four key relationships. Those four key relationships really are kind of like a roadmap for individuals to assess, where's it going well and where's it not going well, and who is bumping into these areas that are causing stress or they're throwing it out of balance for me, can be helpful. And so, as I married my now ex, who was abusive to myself and to my children, I learned very quickly that I was totally out of balance in how I related to myself. I didn't know what good boundaries looked like. And so I chose someone who was very similar. I married someone from a very familiar, uh, he had a very familiar aura of what my father kind of had. But it hurt me. It caused an enormous amount of damage, and it caused even greater damage for my children, which in those circumstances cause even greater imbalance in your sense of self, the relationship with yourself. So everything just gets distorted and thrown out of whack, right? And so I spent probably about 15 years working through those dynamics of what does it mean to have healthy boundaries, and then being prepared to stand my ground when those in my family would confront me and ask me to reconcile. And
Mm,
it was not an easy journey, but using that as a roadmap to assess, like, where am I hurting? Why am I having a problem here? Where am I getting off balance? Is going to be an indicator for you to spend time either in a therapeutic environment. But what I have found, Pete, and this is, I like my song and pony dance is circle. Circle has helped me recognize all of those areas that I was struggling in or where I was actually really strong in, just by listening to the stories of other people and being validated in who I was as a human being, and that I heard other people stand up for what was right in their life, which gave me a sense of courage and power and voice to
yeah.
stand up for what I needed. So it
Hmm.
doesn't fully answer it, but that was kind of my journey.
Wow, that's great. And I love as you talk about finding that voice. So often the abuse and trauma just strips power away.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
talked about finding power,
Yeah.
finding your voice. Uh, that's just so powerful. You mentioned a pattern of seeing the abuse almost as normal.
Mhm.
You mentioned a pattern of struggling to advocate for your boundaries. I guess a twofold question. One would be, are there other patterns that obviously we can't do an across the board thing, but other patterns that seem to show up sometimes in the lives of people who have experienced abuse? And if those patterns are there and they developed, in a relationship with one person, do those patterns just end up showing up then in that relationship with that one person, or do they also flow over to relationship with other people as well?
Yeah, I think I can say for what I've experienced and what I've noticed, um, if you haven't done some of that work, in those, walking out of abuse is a journey. It doesn't like change overnight. In
Mhm.
fact, you can plan on it being years of transformation. I would just encourage those that are listening that have experienced it, like just take the journey and be good to yourself in the process. Take care of yourself through that. What I have found as others came alongside of me, there was impact in my relationships because I attracted a certain type of person in my journey. I was blurring my boundaries all the time. So I would have friendships that would suck me dry. And I was meeting their needs because I was good at it. I was good at meeting other people's needs based on the way I was raised. And then how I chose my first marriage, is just a part of my framework. And learning how to say no or challenging someone who minimizes and shuts down that conversation. That's more on them than it is on you. And I always thought, oh, it must be me. I must be like making people really uncomfortable. No, you have to have space to be able to speak your truth. But then you get to choose your friends. You get to choose those that you want to bring into your family, so that you can stay healthy.
Yeah, you're not forced to, and if somebody tries to force you, that's overstepping. That's
Yep.
not okay. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that. I like that a lot. And
I would say too, a lot of it in families, what I have learned is families want to restore their families. They just want it to go back to normal, right? They don't want to deal with what happened. Can't we just be done with it? And I'm experiencing that currently in my family. And I've had to tell them, no, no, I've got good balance. I've actually feel like the Lord has restored me to where I am in a place that I am comfortable and I'm healthy. And it's not safe for me to re-engage because I'm watching other family members being abused, not as significantly. I mean, I think there's been some lessons learned, but you can see the cycle repeating itself. And so it's not time. It's not
yeah,
time to do reconciliation.
right.
And I that doesn't sound helpful at this point.
Yeah, you made such good points when you talked about it being a journey, that it takes time. I think sometimes we get pressure. All right, now you've had enough time to feel bad about that abuse. Time to be done. Time to
Yep.
move on to your next chapter.
Yep.
But no, it's a journey, and nobody gets to tell you that time frame.
Hmm.
Is that something that really is between you and God?
Hmm.
And no one can step in and dictate that time frame. And I loved how you described it as that journey, to give yourself permission to take the time to work through it. That's
Yeah.
so important. So important. But then that begs the question, we've got this foundation of disrupted relationship. We've got these patterns of feeling that abuse might be normal, these patterns of difficulty advocating for your own boundaries. If that's there, is there hope for change, or are we just stuck with it?
I think there is possibility for change. But when we consider that, it has to be done from the place that the one who has been hurt is the one that primarily gets to say it's time if they feel
Mhm.
like it's ready. It's safe, it's appropriate. For me, in my own experience, I know I'm waiting I would love the day that we could see some restoration and reconciliation in my own family. Just with the grandparent litigation, I'll use that as an example. But I can see now that from the work that I've done myself, there are a few key indicators that I am waiting and looking for before I know that it's a safe relationship to enter into. And I've already chosen that if that day comes, it may not. It may not. I already have peace. I have been validated. I I know my boundaries. But if that day comes, it will be a process through circle that I will have equal voice and power in the conversation, and it will not be done in isolation. It will be done in community. Because if there is going to be restoration, transformation will not occur in isolation. It
Yeah.
just won't. And so it would require lots of accountability for re-entry into that place. So circles really can be a conduit or a vehicle for that process to emerge whenever the person who has been hurt is ready. But you can't enter into that if the one who has abused you repeatedly says things like, was it really like that? Was it really, where there's this rewriting of history,
Yeah.
then there's no sense of remorse.
Yeah.
There's no sense of empathy or sadness for what has happened. You can't reconcile when it comes to that, but you can do your own work to find
Hmm.
peace and resolution and create your own pathway forward to be healthy.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. You talked in there about figuring out the boundaries. How do you do that? How do you figure out healthy boundaries?
I've had to really do a lot of self reflection, and I've had to actually monitor my attitude. If my attitude is going down the toilet one day, I have learned it's a trigger because something has bumped into one of my boundaries, and I maybe wasn't aware of it or I allowed it. And so I've done work in that area that I just assess, how am I doing today? Why am I overreacting to things? And if I am, is there a boundary getting crossed? I try to advocate for myself as my best friend would advocate for me and stand up for me and encourage me and remind me that I really do have power and authority. And I don't mean that in a narcissistic way. I mean that from a place of like, we all have inherent value, dignity, and worth, and we all
Yes.
deserve that. And if I'm feeling like that's not happening, then something in my boundaries is getting bumped. And so I might have to make a decision at that point to go back and speak to an individual if I can kind of trace it back, and I usually can. And it tends to be a circumstance where the person doesn't even know that they've bumped into a boundary of mine. It's a tender spot for me. But it's something that I can make other individuals aware of so that it doesn't create fracturing in that relationship. Not that it's about all my needs, but if we're going to be in good relationship, have that phileo relationship, then encouraging virtue and a virtuous relationship is a good thing. And it's
Yeah.
okay to let people know where you're at.
Yeah. If you have a friend that seems to be struggling,
Mm.
maybe they've experienced some form of abuse, maybe you don't know why, but they seem to be struggling in relationships. What can you do to help your friend? I mean, you talked about your healing that you've talked about has been through relationship. So relationship, it seems, is a huge piece, but if I'm in relationship with someone who's hurting, what can I do?
Yeah, I would say there's probably four things you can do. First, do not minimize how they're feeling and don't shut them down. It might make you uncomfortable, but that's you projecting your wishes on someone else, right? So just don't minimize. That actually makes it worse. That actually tells that individual, oh, it's actually me. I'm the problem. and it's usually not,
That's good. Yeah.
right? Second, hold space for them. Just sit with them. If you go to the book of Job, you read about what Job needed. There's grief in the midst of hurt. And so just holding space, just as you would for a loved one who lost their parent or lost a sibling or lost their best friend, you hold space and you can just sit with them and wait. It's okay. So many times when I was walking through my journey, people would try to shut it down or they would try to give me a solution. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. And just holding space is
Yeah.
appropriate. And then the other two things I would say is, now that you're aware of those 4 key relationships, how can you creatively ask questions to help that individual balance that out, or at least start to unpack it? You can be the creative igniter of conversations and a gentle encourager that they have value, dignity, and worth. If they hear that over and over and over again, they have value, dignity, and worth, that's going to go a long ways, because I can tell you right now, we assign a scarlet letter to ourselves, and we need people to dismantle it. And then last, I would say, gather other people when they're ready to talk and give them a community to listen. And if you want to be trained in circles, you know how to do it, we can teach you how to do that. But offering space for healing in community can be really powerful. And circle is not about professional training. It's just about everyday people knowing how to create space for everyday people based on whatever is needed in the moment.
Yeah. That's good, because I think that we know, it's just a fact that everybody knows somebody who's been abused.
Yeah.
There's just no way to get around that.
Yep.
We know from the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experience study, at least 2/3 of kids have an adverse childhood experience, or an event that could be a traumatic event in their lives. And that's just what happens to people as kids.
Yeah.
Sometimes things happen to people as adults too. So if 2/3 of people, that means if you have 2 friends, it's almost a guarantee that at least one of them has experienced abuse.
Yeah.
And if you include yourself, so that now we've got 3, chances are 2 of you have. So every one of us is going to encounter a person that has walked this road, whether we know it or not. So it's important for us to know what options we have as we see a friend hurting. Let's take it to another level, though. What if I'm a faith leader? What if I'm a pastor? What if I'm a youth group leader? What if I'm an elder? What if I'm whatever it might be? As a faith leader, what can I do if I see someone hurting in this way and I see this relationship pain in their life?
Okay, how much time do we have for that one?
about 5 more minutes.
Oh, okay. So first, anyone who is leading in the faith community, I have walked in your shoes. And the question I asked myself was, why do we not have a program that teaches people how to live well together and do what Christ is saying he is accomplishing, that he is reconciling all things back to himself in 1 Colossians 20? Because we as leaders in the church are really good at helping people come into right relationship with God, right? But we don't necessarily have the ministries available to equip people how to live well together. And Pete, when you talk about the pervasiveness of 2/3 of the American public, or maybe even the globe, have endured abuse, then the church has a very unique opportunity and should be leading the way. and teaching the world how to live in right relationship with one another. And, this is why I've launched the Catalasso group, because the design of this ministry is to equip the church to know how to lean in, to create these safe spaces for children and
Yes.
families to heal, so they can take the scarlet letter off, and they can hear, and they can transform. But it can also be a very important and appropriate ministry to reach out into your neighborhoods. This can be how you do local missions. I was a local missions pastor, and this is where I learned about circles and thought, wow, there is so much power in this process. If the church could bring this to the community and help heal and restore families and those key relationships, and helping those that have been victimized and hurt to be validated, to be known, to be included. They're not isolated. My goodness, can you imagine what our churches would look like? Can you
Yeah.
imagine? It would be beautiful to see that. So, for the faith leaders, I think I would just encourage you to seriously consider adding a ministry, adding circles as a part of your ministry. And you can check out the website for that sort of information.
Yeah. What an incredible way to reach out to the body of Christ, but also to the surrounding community.
Oh,
And isn't,
so relevant.
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Lisa, as we wrap up, can you share just a story of hope? What is a story that when you think about just fills you with hope in this area?
Mm. You know, this might sound cheesy, but it's my kids.
Hmm.
In the process of overcoming abuse myself, I really created a spiritual and physical covering for my children, and did the hard work of leaning in to take care of myself so I could be as good of a parent as I possibly could. And I prayed, and I surrounded my children with healthy relationships. And today, both of my kids are on their 2 feet. They are doing exceptionally well. They're in college. They have overcome their own hard days. And I don't see a lot of stories like that. Given the amount of litigation, 3 failed reunification processes, 5 guardian ad litems, they were raised in the court system, and
Hmm.
then had the impact of a grandparent lawsuit. So the amount of conflict and ickiness within the relationships, my children have overcome it, but they've experienced restorative leadership in their lives. They've had access um, to someone listening and
Yeah.
validating and
Yeah.
walking them through the journey, and making sure that they had the spiritual covering, the physical covering, and they've landed on their feet.
Wow. The power of a mom who has experienced abuse forming a covering and protecting her kids.
Mhm.
That's powerful. That
And the
is
abuse
powerful.
stopped.
Yeah.
Done. It ended, and they are free.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Lisa, thank you very much for sharing your story with us, for talking to us about relationships, the importance of validating the experience that a person has, finding a way to set those boundaries that are so important, helping us to better understand our relationship with God, with ourselves, with our family and those around us, and with our purpose. That's just so, so powerful. Thank you for being with us today. Next month in May, we are going to have a guest, actually a couple of guests from the University of Minnesota Children's Masonic Center. We're going to talk about the physical health effects of abuse, the physical health effects of child abuse specifically. And so we'll have a team of pediatric abuse specialists that will be joining us. I think at this point we'll have 2 people from the U of M joining us for that discussion. We're still in the process of working out the exact schedule with them. So I don't have the exact date for May yet, and I'm sorry about that. But that will be our focus in May, is the physical impact of abuse. We hope that we see you there. We've really appreciated just the way that you've come alongside and listened and participated with the comments and everything that you all are putting in the Facebook page. It really enlivens the discussion, and you've been an incredible support to each other as we've gone on this journey of trying to understand what is abuse and how does it affect us. After next week, we're going to round the corner a little bit, because we'll have talked about a number of the ways that abuse affects us, and we're going to start talking more directly about, so then what do we do about it? How do we prevent it? What do we do when we hear an outcry? What do we do to help hold people accountable? And so after we have the conversation around the physical health impacts, that will be our next focus. So what do we do about it? Because there's incredible hope. As Lisa was mentioning, hope. We actually can do something about this. And that's going to be our focus as we head into this summer. Thanks again, and I hope you all have a great night.